Pulawanaka and welcome to For the Record. Tonight we're talking about the International Women's Day celebrations and Fiji's presentation on the Commission on the Status of Women. In studio with us tonight we have the Permanent Secretary for Women, Dr. Joko Revueta, the Director for Women from the Ministry of Women, Ms. Arieta Modeida, and Faye Volatambu, the General Secretary for the National Council of Women. And on the panel on my side, I'm joined by Joshua Tuere from the Fiji Sun. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being on the show. It's a very important weekend, not just for Fiji, but for the entire world. Dr. Joe, the International Women's Day celebrations coincides with the Commission on the Status of Women. You and the Minister are leading a delegation. Obviously, there will be a lot of positives to talk about. What, in a nutshell, does Fiji have to tell the world about our situation so far as women are concerned?
Thank you, Edwin. In a nutshell, we want to portray to the Commission and also to the world the reality. And the principle of the Fijian government is to be truthful and be very honest about the status of women in our country. And also looking at the achievements that the Fijian government has achieved, in the interim period and also now after the democratic elections of 2014. And what are the instruments that we have on the ground, to make, progress as far as women's issues are concerned, empowerment of issues, the policies, changes, and what are our obligations on the international frontiers. And knowing that we're into the post-2015 agenda, this will be something that, so as far as the CSW is concerned, there are some pressing engagements that we have to partake in. First, the Minister will give a national statement to the Commission, and there is also a panel discussion with the DAWN, which is one of the NGOs that will be present in a more visible form at the CSW. And further to that, we also have some very bilateral discussions that we are going to scope, basically to look for opportunities whereby there is immense benefit towards the empowerment of our women in the country in terms of business opportunities, in terms of improving livelihoods. So these are some of the very positive things that we're going to really scope at this level. I know it's a different time now, and we will need to look for opportunities to make a difference to the lives of women, because we certainly believe that women have a very power base that can be utilized to benefit development on a national scale in all frontiers in Fiji.
Mm-hmm. Arieta, you work more on operational level as the Director for Women. Now, there is the policy level where the government sets the policies and the legislation to ensure equality and empowerment. So far as working with women on the ground level, in the grassroots is concerned, is it really, what word can I use? Is it easy to change mindsets, to show people, not just women, but men as well, that there really shouldn't be any differences?
Thank you, Edwin, and thank you, Joshua. The work that the National Women's Machinery does at the ground level is under the thematic areas that could derive out of the Beijing Platform for Action, and we have taken out of that 12 and focused on 5 in the Women's Plan of Action. So we work on women's economic, socio-economic empowerment, women's access to justice, and the other thematic areas. Just to directly respond to your question, things have changed. Since 1995, when we ratified CEDAW, just before going to the 4th World Conference on Women and ratifying or signing on to the Beijing Declaration, we've submitted 4 state reports under CEDAW. We have done, and now we've just completed the 20-year review of the Beijing Platform for Action. A lot has been accomplished for women, and that's because women have proven at the grassroots level, at the ground level, that they are positive agents for change. The hierarchy may not necessarily have accepted that over the years, but with strong policy and advocacy and lobbying by women's NGOs and the governments in the last 10 to 20 years, we've seen the policies change. We've come a long way since then. So, for example, you have our zero tolerance violence-free community programs. We've got declared communities around the country. Now, they don't only focus on women as victims of violence, they very much focus on the prevention of violence at the leadership level within the communities. And so in each of these communities, there's a gatekeepers committee that's made up of the church leader, the Durangani choral, and the youth and women's leaders. For me, that is acceptance. And the fact there's increased reporting of violence against women, not only by women, by male relatives, it's a sign that culturally, Fiji is accepting that violence against women is not on culturally. You have the laws, you've got the constitution, you've got the national gender policy, you've got the no-drop policy within the Fiji police force, and men and women are implementors of that. For me, that's a sign of cultural acceptance, that women's place is at the decision-making table, is equal with men, culturally and politically as well.
Where are some areas of concern for you at the moment in terms of, say, cultural resistance? Would you like to identify some of those areas?
I guess you would say religiously, there are still religious barriers where religious leaders continue to use their scriptures and the scriptural texts to continue to justify women's subservience, women's domination. And that is work in progress, and that's why our partnership with faith-based organizations are critical. Our partnerships with women's lobbying groups are important. We cannot do it all on our own. We need the support of civil society. But there are a lot of church leaders. There are many church leaders who are standing up and speaking out in support of women's rights as something God-given. And I reiterate what PS and the Honorable Minister and the former Minister have always said, without the male partnership, we will not win this battle. It is very important that both the sexes see that it's about partnership and development and not one sex lording it over the other.
All right, on that note, we have to take a break now. We'll be right back. Punamanaka, and welcome to For the Record once again. Tonight we're talking about the International Women's Day and Fiji's report on to the Commission on the Status of Women. Faye Volotambo, the General Secretary of the National Council of Women, is also with us tonight. Faye, we've heard briefly from the Ministry of Women about what they're doing in terms of women's empowerment and equality. So far as the Council is concerned, what do you see as the most urgent and immediate need so far as women's empowerment is concerned on a national level, in terms of policy and legislation, and also on a grassroots level in the homes, in terms of mindsets and family settings?
Thank you, Edwin. One of the biggest issues that we have, and we had raised this in our parliamentary submission to the opposition with regards to the budget, is the fact that we need to have more budgetary allocation for women's activities. We make up half of the population of Fiji, so therefore we would consider that at least half of the government's budget, or a quarter of that, is given to women's work, and that there should be a consistent application of this in all government ministries, so that if you have budget given for agricultural work, 50% of that should be directed towards women. For the education and the scholarships, 50% of the scholarship should be awarded to women. These are issues that we're looking at. And then once you have the budgetary allocations, then it would be easier for us to go into things like looking at the human rights HR policies for all workplaces that should be gender positive. And when I use the word gender, because we have women, different kinds of women. So when we talk about women, we're not just talking about the professional women or women that are in a particular sector, but all women, all levels of women, and all from different social backgrounds. That's one of the biggest issues that we have, that the budgetary allocation has to match the commitment that we make on the international arena. Secondly is the fact that more networks should be done with the existing structures. I represent the National Council of Women. There's another umbrella organization called the Sobosongo Wakamarama, that we are not reinventing the wheel, but we are working within these structures and help them within the structures that they have instead of reinventing the wheel. Most of these women's organizations have already plans to implement the CEDAW work, the Beijing Platform of Action, and what we are doing is to be the arms of government on the ground. The history of the setting up of the Ministry of Women in this country was that they were to work hand in hand with the then National Council of Women. They needed a voice in Parliament so that they did not work in isolation. And it has historically been the case that the Ministry of Women always works with the National Council of Women. But somewhere along the line, I think Arietta has alluded to that, maybe because of political ideology and the stance that the National Council of Women has made, we have lost sight of that the fact that they do the policies at the national level, we are the implementers on the ground. So what we would like to see is more partnership in that aspect, that it's a real partnership. We have budgetary allocations. You'll notice that the big organizations in Fiji need a lot of help, but often they are, there's not much coming in that particular area, so there is a need for consistent connection. For the National Council of Women, we've been fortunate in that we haven't received help locally, but we've received it internationally. So we have programs that align to our 14 thematic areas, which again stemmed out from the Beijing Platform of Action. And currently, we are investing a lot of our time in civic education. Last year, we were looking at the information leading up to the election of women into Parliament. Now we are focusing our efforts on educating the public about the parliamentary process and how we as Fiji citizens can contribute to the new democratic Fiji.
All right, thank you, Faye. P.S. The point about splitting budget based on gender. The ministry has a lot of targeted programs that it does, but what the National Council of Women says, split budget based on gender because women make up 50% of the population. Is that viable, in your opinion?
It's something that we can move forward to, and it's the under theme of gender-based budgeting. But I think certainly we can look within right now to address what Faye has mentioned. It's basically to look at budgets within ministries and address it from that particular perspective. In fact, gender mainstreaming is an integral part of all the ministries' annual corporate plan. So we can do a submarine look, within each of the ministries, and certainly our department can do that, and looking at evidence-based, results on, what the government provides for the women. But I think there's a lot of good practices that has been practicing now, to make a difference. In fact, if you look back over the years, there's been a 300% increase in the amount of budget being allocated to the Department of Women, and that is very significant. And that basically shows, in a bold sense, government commitments towards women in our country.
The issue of networking, engaging more with NGOs, and Faye pointed out that it may have fallen out over the years, but I understand the ministry does have plans to have roundtable discussions. Arietta, PS?
Okay. In fact, not too long ago, we actually had an open invitation to all the women's NGOs, our partners and donors, for us to come together on a roundtable and basically to look at relational issues. And we know that there are differences, there's no doubt about it. But above these differences, we need to work together. And the key theme here is partnership. And we know that some NGOs are very experts in some certain areas. So government has got an open hand there. They can certainly come in to be the partner in that particular regard. Whether it's dealing with women in business, dealing with violence against women, access to justice, livelihoods, market for change, all these particular initiatives, we know that we need partners. And 2 or 3 working together makes a bigger difference.
All right, and with that, it's time to take another break. Don't go anywhere, we'll be back soon. Welcome back to For the Record. We're talking about the International Women's Day, and I will give Joshua the next question.
Faye, just going back to the point of women's representation in Parliament, there have been women leaders and pioneers who have gone on the record having strong reservations about quotas for women in Parliament, and their point being that they've framed their answers in terms of equality, that women should be treated equal and not given sort of preferential treatment, so to speak. What's your view on that?
Well, you've actually answered the question yourself, Joshua. Our women have not been treated equally. That's why we've had CEDAW, that's why we have Article 4, which talks about temporary special measures. That these preferential treatment for women is only given in as much as the women reach 50%. Once they get to 50%, then the preferential treatment is taken away. The issue there is that our cultural structures are the way we think. There was a research that was done on that, and the perception of people is that there is this leaning towards traditional leadership. So because we're a very patriarchal society in Fiji, and it doesn't help with the kind of religious values that we've been brought up in, that the men are supposed to be leading, these are some of the international instruments that have been put forward, which we are trying to adopt in Fiji to ensure that women do have that equal say. And if you notice, in the last election, despite all that has been done, the number of women are still lacking. So there is still, even amongst women, the idea that men are to lead. And those are the kind of things that we're trying to work within, even amongst women. So we are currently doing a survey at the National Council of Women to try and look at the perceptions of how the voting went. And it's interesting that we've collected about 100 surveys, and one of the very common answers that was coming across, this is unofficial, is that the people want a woman leader. And that's quite interesting, considering the election results. So we're looking forward to when we finally finish everything that has come through. And right soon after the election, and people are talking about having a woman prime minister, which was one of the questions that we put through. It's quite interesting. So there might be one or two women, but you'll also have to consider that in the time and the era that they were living in, the values that they were brought up in might have been different to what we have now. Fiji is still a long way away. Even the US and the Australian governments are still a long way away. But we are working towards it. And that's one of the things that I guess the minister and the Fiji government will be looking at, how Fiji has progressed in terms of representation in parliament. I think currently we're the highest, 20%. So we have progressed, but our Beijing Platform of Action looked at 30%. So we have progressed, but we still haven't reached our target yet. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
P.S. Faye has made some interesting points, temporary special measures, wider representation of women in parliament. What do you think, which way are we moving, and how can the Ministry of Women influence this?
I think to dwell with the truth, one of the big things that we have observed, and I think has come out very clearly, is the solidarity amongst women. I think if you get our house in order, then if women are truly united, then you would be able to really achieve, the desired outcome of higher representation in Parliament. But and this is one of the advocation messages we tell our women, that please that you need to work, despite the differences, work towards solidarity. It's an issue that we find in the women's organizations that come through our network, even in the various groups that we do encounter in terms of livelihood. It's an issue that truly affects the success or the sustainability of some of our income-generating projects. So to us, solidarity is one key issue. And before we come, to the higher game level, we need to get that first, the solidarity among our women.
Obviously, one of the, as you've mentioned already, one of the key strategies at the moment is also bringing the men on board. I mean, obviously, that's part and parcel of the partnership. How do you do that at a national level in terms of policy?
I guess having male champions is a good idea, because when men see other reputable or very influential men leading the charge, it makes it easier for other men to follow. Despite the fact that we are so progressive and so educated, we still have, excuse the word, the pack mentality. When the leader is in the pack, then everybody will follow. But for us in the advocacy for elimination of violence against women, one of the challenges is finding a true male champion, because a lot of men are very nice in public, and when we have zoomed in on certain men, then we find out that they have a record probably in one of our organizations of violence, and we're only human. So that's a challenge. It's easy to find an advocacy for civic education or for HIV or for any other cause, but when it comes to violence, we want a man who is truly a peace-loving man. So maybe one of the two gentlemen here could be opting to be one of our main advocates, but that's one of the things that we're looking at. Yeah.
Arietta, do you find similar problems within the ministry when you have your programs? Violence-free community, for example, let's say. Do you face the same problem?
What problem?
Well, in terms of men not willing to step forward, or men who do come forward aren't exactly being honest about their stand.
Yes, we have the same problem. We've found it, but we have to realize that culturally, it's been acceptable for men to beat their wives. But when men come to realize and they do make changes, I think we need to give them a chance to prove that they've changed and stand up to be a champion. And they make better advocates because they know what it's like to leave behind the way they used to deal with their anger issues in the past and become a transformed person. That's one. If I may just go back to the one on the political leadership, it's no point telling the nation to vote for women leaders when women themselves don't vote for women leaders. And that's one stance we've taken. We've got the laws that are so gender responsive. We've got the budgeting in place. We've got the roadmap, which has a gender goal, which basically directs each and every government ministry to have a gender goal and indicator within the annual corporate plan. And so we have all these things in place. But it'd be interesting to see the study coming out of the National Council of Women. Women say they want women leaders, but the election results don't tell us that.
Well,
women themselves have to vote for women leaders before we can expect the men to vote for women leaders.
If I may make an assessment, there were women candidates who stood in the election.
Exactly.
They were failed by the voters.
It was the women voters. If women make up
Not
49%
not
of the
just
population,
not just women voters. They were failed by the voters because everybody of legal age
But
voted.
first and foremost, if all the women voted, all the registered women voters voted for the women's leaders, we would see higher numbers.
All right. On that note, Arietta, unfortunately, time for another break. We'll be back very soon. All right, welcome back. We're having some very interesting discussions around International Women's Day. Before the break, the point was made by the Director Women that a lot of the voters may not have stepped up to the plate during the elections. Faye, you were very heavily involved in the elections. You would have some insight from a different perspective, but is it accurate to say that the women voters failed the women candidates?
Is it accurate to say that the election results were the right election results? I myself still question that to this day. And I choose not to engage in how true were the election results, because what we are hearing from the ground as we're doing our survey is different.
The question that I'm posing to you is Arietta correct in saying that when a woman candidate stands, it is only fair that women voters should step up and give their votes to the women? It's the women who have to take the first step. Is that an accurate statement? That's the question.
Why only the women? Because the women is useful both to the women and to the family. So it's everyone that should be voting for women. Again, it brings me to the question, are we going to gauge the last election as a true result of that particular question? Because I'm waiting for our survey, and what I've been hearing from the ground, it's a challenge. So it's exciting times. I know the election results is there. Let's wait another 4 years, 2018, then we could have this conversation again, and we could then be able to say whether the women really did vote for the women or whether they really did vote for the women and it was not counted.
All right, thank you. Joshua.
What's happening on the ground in terms of, obviously, you were very much part of the electoral process, but in terms of raising sort of the next generation, so to speak, what's happening at the ground level? Political awareness, civic education?
For us at the National Council of Women, that's already what we are starting to do now. We actually have a 3-tier program. We do, starting from this month, this Friday is the first event where the President hosts women leaders, and we call it the President's Talanoa Sessions. The General Secretary hosts professional women, and we're having our second sundown on this Friday. And we have a youth Talanoa sessions too. So this is where all these conversations are happening. So we talk about the parliamentary process, we talk about the civic education, we talk about the election issues, and it's interesting how some issues like tuition fees and how students are struggling and economic empowerment programs coming through this Talanoa session. So we have already started in that. It's at a more informal setting, and when we have our workshops, after every workshop, we sit down and have an informal discussion, the Pacific Island way, and it's been very fruitful from the results of the discussions that are coming through. So that's our way of engaging, and from that, we are also doing this informal survey, and the results that are coming through, I can't wait for the survey to be completed.
Neither can we.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Dr. Joe, how does a government, how does a ministry groom future political leaders, or ingrain in the mindset of women that they too can be leaders?
Yeah. It's a challenge to address it. We're dealing with mindset issues. We're dealing with propagated belief systems that have been there over time. There's been actually fertilized by the culture and the traditions that we have, and also within the various faith-based organizations. So changing mindset takes time. But I guess the positive thing that we can advocate is when you start to talk about it. It makes a big difference. The issue about gender is an issue about power relationships. And there has to be a very, very mutual understanding on this. And it's not a confrontational issue. It's an issue that has to be discussed and tolerated, and in the various networks, the men's network, the women's network, and even in the families. In fact, we advocate very strongly that one of the principles underlying this is that they need to have a very integrated family life. Because once the family life is injured, the social ills that we see around Fiji now erupts.
Right. Arieta, are there any specific programs that your department is working on to groom young girls from a very early age into leadership positions?
Thank you, Edwin, for the question. You must appreciate that as a National Women's Machinery, it focuses specifically on women, above the age of children. We've got the Ministry for Youth that looks at younger women. We also are very mindful that we have women's NGOs that are doing work that we don't need to go and duplicate. So if they're doing what they're doing and the FWRM is doing what it's doing in raising future political leaders, what we need to focus on as our cutting edge is focusing on the policies, because they can do all they want to do in the CSO sector. If the policies and the policy environment isn't conducive, it all goes to waste. So we focus on what we do best, is ensuring the policies are in place, they're robust, they're monitored, they're reviewed. And to that, we've had the Maramani Avusa training last year. This year we'll focus on the women councillors in the advisory council. There's something also innovative that we're doing we're doing in partnership with the Australian government and the University of the South Pacific. We'll have the first national time use survey. So if you say we want women in leadership, we want women here and there, this is really going to measure how women in the home spend their time during the day. So we quantify it. And then we'll see, because if we say we need women here, sitting here, and you look at how they're spending their day, if they're spending 75% of it really tending to family activities, the productive role, reproductive role, where will they find the time for leadership? So then you would need to then target your political leadership program, maybe not necessarily at those in the early childbearing age range, maybe people 40 plus, 50 plus. So this time use survey will really be able to inform very intelligently how we target our programs. We've had the bridge training that was run by UN Women, where they trained women leaders. They did not train Ministry for Women staff. They trained Faye and them. They trained the women CSOs, and that was supported by government in the past. So there's a lot of things happening. It does not necessarily have to be the National Women's Machinery. And when you talk about mainstreaming, it's not only the women's machinery that's doing it. It's mainstreaming all across government. Since 2004 till this year's budget, there's been a 560% programming increase of the Department for Women's budget. I mean, I beg to differ with Faye in that we don't want half of government budget coming to us. That defeats the whole purpose. That continues to perpetuate the silo mentality. What we need to see is mainstreaming within each and every government ministry. And Faye rightfully pointed out, agriculture. Now, I talked about the roadmap, which out of it derives the annual corporate plan of each government ministry. Each of them have a gender goal, and they're talking to us. We're already making inroads with Tauki Affairs and the Commissioner's offices, where they're coming to us, okay, how do we ensure gender is taken care of here.
Arietta, I'm going to have to pause you briefly, but I would like to pick up on those points very quickly. It's time for another break. Welcome back once again to For the Record, our last segment now. Arietta, before the break, you were talking about reaching out to individual ministries about their gender programs. Very interestingly, you picked on the Ministry of Ethiopian Affairs, which has over the years been seen as one of the male-dominated ministries, and it's been run by the men who call the shots. So what sort of changes are you seeing in the ministries and in the civil service?
Okay. Our inroad to the Ethiopian Affairs is really through the income-generating support we provide to women's groups. Now, the rapporteurs are coming to us. When there's a meeting at the provincial level, they call our Department for Women's Affairs officers and say, there's a meeting, there are issues being brought up by the women. So when you have the rapporteurs, the DOs, the PAs taking on board gender considerations, that for us is a big win, it's a big plus. I'll give you an example. We've got a joint program with Indonesia for seaweed in one of the villages. We've had some challenges there. We go through the officers of the Ethiopian Affairs, through the officers of the Rokotui, to find out what the challenges are. Instead of us going in, again, we're taking away the silo mentality and realizing this is a whole of government approach to develop a particular community. We do not go in loading it and saying we have all the answers, we have all the budgets. But the Ethiopian Affairs puts in their budget. Divisional Commissioners officers put in their budget. That is what mainstreaming is about. We've had Ministry for Defense come to us and say, can you help us develop a SOP on how to mainstream gender within our processes? For us, that would have been unheard of at least 5 years ago. So those are the inroads we're making. And that's because of the roadmap, government roadmap, that directs that each and every ministry's annual corporate plan has a gender commitment.
The Maramanyabusa training is an interesting initiative where you actually are going deep into the Bunua and targeting the heads of clans. And so how has the response been like so far?
You know, very interestingly, these Maramaniyavusas are born with blue blood in their veins. They're there because of their birthright. Many of them never felt that they had, they had a right to claim their leadership positions. We heard from the Ethiopian Affairs officials, so some of the women would say, oh, let the men go. And the men would turn around, the Rokotis would turn around, you have been blessed with a role, you need to attend the training. So they really appreciated the fact that they were recognized in their role. We just basically taught them the art of communicating. Basically told them, you have been blessed by God to have been born with blue blood in your veins. You have a responsibility to your people to lead well. So they were taught how to articulate women's needs at the provincial meeting, at the Tikina meetings. That's a first step. And we'll be following up when we have the next meeting this year. We'll be following up with them. They all got a handset from Vodafone. And so those are some of the means through which we're monitoring how things are for them on the ground. A very critical partner is the Ethiopian Affairs. We do not go anywhere near them without informing the Ethiopian Affairs and going in through their offices.
Mm-hmm. Just towards the end of the show now, Dr. Joe, do you expect there would be a lot of pressing questions about Fiji's status on women, more so because of our political history, more so because we've been through a takeover in 2006, and there was disengagement for a long time, and Fiji is sort of still seen as a bit of a black sheep in the global community. Do you expect that to influence some of the questions that may come up as part of the discussions at the Commission on the Status of Women?
Yeah, I think that is a likely possibility. But I think if you focus on the positives, then you see a very different shape towards Fiji's roadmap right now. Because I think Fiji, for the first time, has now got a national gender policy. Now, if you look at countries in the Pacific, we cannot compare, what Fiji's attained. And Fiji's on a move right now, and a very positive and progressive. And like I said, we have got a map, we've got a forward-looking map, with all the partners on board, making a positive contribution, towards the status of women. Certainly, we can make a difference.
In the years to come, say at the next review of the Beijing commitment, what sort of situation would you like to see in Fiji in terms of women empowerment and equality?
Yeah, I would like to see what is making the change on what we have on the ground now. If you look at the professional cadres in government agencies, they're mostly from middle management downwards. Now, the key thing that we always ask, why women never persevered or attained those high positions, we need to understand those. Right now, we don't have a very clear understanding. And once we identify those, and you make solutions to that, or make allowances to promote women into higher executive position, then you really can make a difference.
Arietta, do you expect things will get easier for the ministry? Because a lot of the young women who are growing up now, and I'm talking about anything from high school up to tertiary level and beyond, they are more aware of where their status or where their position is.
It will, because we will have women making a difference themselves and being credible, but also given the government, the constitution, the gender policy, and the kind of budgeting that we're seeing this government giving, not only to the National Women's Machinery, but all across the government budget, we have an enabling environment. It's no point having very empowered women and the environment is not enabling. With this current government and its policies and what it's proven in the last 8 years, our work will get easier. Thank you.
All right, Josh, one very quick question for you.
Oh, maybe one final question to Faye. The National Council of Women, what are some key deliverables you'd like to see in the next year?
Well,
Very quickly.
and ensuring that our budget is actually women-focused. We have a very big budget, but half of that is given to social welfare. Women's issues should be separated from social welfare, and the women's budget should be allocated likewise. So that's one of the key issues. And of course, we'll be following through on the gender audit that will be happening as far as the budget, human resources, and all that the government will be putting into place. But for next year, if we have a new women's ministry with its own set of budget, not lumped together with social welfare, we'll be happy. As it is, half of that money goes to social welfare ministry, so that's still a challenge for us.
All right, thank you, Faye, and thank you to all my guests tonight, Dr. Joe, Arietta, Faye, and Joshua, you as well, for coming in. That was our show tonight. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, email us for the record at fbc.com.fj. We'll be back again next Sunday. Until then, good night.